I never set out to raise anything. I kept the manifest straight, and the crates fed at Cradle Dock on Verge Station, where the relay runs caught whatever came loose from the frontier nests. Egg clutches nobody claimed, orphans too small to sell, stock too strange to match a buyer's order. Most of what came through my hatch went out again inside a week, boxed for some menagerie 3 jumps deeper in. What didn't sell got culled. That was the job. I didn't love it, but I was good at it, and good was enough to keep the lights on. The 3 that didn't sell came in the same week, off 3 different manifests, and somebody decided 1 pen would do for all of them since none weighed more than a sack of grain. A terror hound pup with a leg that hadn't set right. Vask, I called him, after the sound he made trying to bark. A feline alien cub too undersized for the show buyers, slate gray and silent, Pier, and a reptilian hatchling with a temperament note stamped Unstable, in red copper-scaled, eyes like wet glass, Koru. 3 species that, by every rule the handlers go armored for, should have torn each other apart in that pen before the second feeding. They didn't. They shook instead. 3 different shakes, 3 different rhythms of cold and fear, until I got tired of listening to it through the wall and started sitting in there with them after my shift. I didn't do anything heroic. I sat on an overturned crate and let them lean on my boots until they stopped shaking. By the second week they weren't leaning on my boots anymore. They were leaning on each other, tangled into one shape on top of my coat, hound leg over reptile tail over feline spine, breathing in the same slow rhythm, like they'd agreed on it without a vote. They each kept their own habits even tangled together like that. Pira learned to steal a glove off my belt and sleep with it under his chin like a stolen kill. Koru copied the way I stretched my shoulders every morning before the first feeding, rising up on his hind legs and arching his spine in a motion no reptile his age should have had the joints for. Vask, bad leg and all, worked out that if he sat square at my left boot during mess call, nobody bothered making him beg for scraps. I just handed them down without looking. None of it was training. I never once told any of them to do any of it. They watched, and they copied, and somewhere in the copying, they stopped being 3 separate animals waiting out a sentence and started being something that planned its days around mine. The dock crew started calling it the knot before I did. Garrison guards walk this station in plate thick enough to stop around, because an adult of any one of those 3 species will open a man to the spine without trying. They'd stand at the pen rail in full kit, just to watch 3 orphans sleep in a pile on a penkeeper's coat, and not one of them ever explained why that sight unsettled them more than a grown predator pacing a cage. I didn't need it explained. I knew. An animal that size alone is dangerous. An animal that size, moving as one mind with 2 others that don't even share its blood, is something the manifest has no box for. Quartermaster Drennick found that box anyway. He came through on inspection with a stylus and a clean uniform, and read my pen tally like it owed him money. Mixed species juvenile cohort, no buyer class, temperament flag on 1 unit. He didn't even look up from the slate. Schedule it for the cull line, end of week, he said, the way another man might tell you to take out the trash. I told him they weren't ready. He told me readiness wasn't the metric. I told him to give me time. He told me the dock didn't run on time. It ran on throughput, and walked off to inspect the egg crates like the conversation was already filed. I didn't have an argument that would move a stylus, so I did the only thing I had. I kept feeding them, kept sitting with them, kept saying the same 2 words every time one of them startled at the dock klaxon. Easy now, stay close. I said it so often, the mess cook started letting all 3 trail me through the serving line without a permit, and the first time Koru put his copper head up over the tray rail and hissed at a line cook who'd flinched too loud, the cook just laughed and gave him a strip of dried meat instead of a write-up. Some duty officer with too much time on the night shift wrote the whole arrangement into the logbook as a joke. Not standing order, 0600, mess override authorized, and the joke stuck harder than the regulation it was mocking. By the week's end, half the garrison used the phrase straight-faced, the way men use a nickname long after they've forgotten it started as an insult, and guards who'd never have let an unleashed predator near the serving line waved all 3 of mine through without a second look. Drennick came himself on cull day. 2 handlers in full plate behind him, stun rods up, the way you'd escort something you respected enough to fear and not enough to ask its name. I was on the crate with my coat still warm from the morning. I stood up slow, the way I always did around them, and said it one more time. Easy now. Stay close. Meaning it as nothing more than what it always was. A small thing said to small animals so they wouldn't bolt. They didn't bolt. They unknotted. I'd never once seen them move apart on purpose before that morning. Vask went left on his bad leg, dragging it but moving. Pier went right low along the deck plating with his belly, almost to the grating, and Koru planted himself square between my boots and the handlers, with his throat already swelling for a sound I'd never heard him make. Something low and wet, that didn't belong to any creature his size. 3 different gates, 3 different threat displays, 3 different bloodlines, and not 1 second of hesitation between them, like the knot they'd tied every night had taught their bodies a shape that worked standing up as well as lying down. One handler took half a step, and Vask's bad leg held just long enough to put him in the gap before the man's boot landed. The other handler's rod hand drifted toward Koru, and Pier was already between them, low and silent, before the rod ever cleared its loop. The handler's rods are calibrated for a single panicking animal. Nobody calibrates for 3 coordinated ones covering each other's blind side, and both men stopped reaching before either of them had to find out what that miscalibration would cost. Drennick stopped walking before his handlers did. I watched it happen to his face. The same look I'd seen on every garrison guard at that pen rail, except his didn't have plate armor to hide behind. He'd come to collect unsellable stock, and what stood in front of him instead was a single animal wearing 3 skins, one that had already decided what it would cost him to take one more step toward me. He didn't order the handlers forward. He didn't say anything that saved his footing in front of a dock full of crew who'd gathered at the noise. He just told them to stand down, voice flat, signed something on his slate without reading it back, and left the way men leave when they wanted understood they were never really there. The cull order never got refiled. Nobody on that dock ever said so out loud. That would have meant admitting what they'd watched. But the manifest still lists all 3 of them under my name, and the logbook joke is regulation now in everything but the official seal. New handlers who transfer in still ask why the pen rail by my crate has worn smooth in 3 different spots at 3 different heights, and nobody who's been on this dock more than a season ever bothers explaining it to them. They just say to come by at mess call and watch. Vask's leg healed crooked, and he's already twice the dock's biggest guardhound, with Pier and Koru still small enough to ride his shoulders when they cross the yard, though that won't last another season either. They don't sleep in a knot anymore, not really. They've outgrown the shape of it, the way most things eventually outgrow the shapes that first kept them alive. But some nights, when the klaxon runs a drill too close to feeding time, I'll feel 3 different weights settle against my boots in the old order: hound leg, reptile tail, feline spine, and I'll say the same 2 words I always have. Not because they need calming anymore, but because I think, by now, they just like hearing it. Easy now. Stay close. That's all it ever took. I never trained them to guard anything. They decided it on their own, the day they learned my coat was warmer than any single one of their own kind, and the day Quartermaster Drennick learned that 3 orphans nobody wanted had quietly become the most coordinated thing on Verge Station, and that the cheapest words on the manifest had become the only ones with any real weight behind them.